And just looking at Y chromosome SNP dendrogram, you can see that R1, RB, R1A have to do with the European, Q3, Q Native American, and there are a few Central Asian haplogroups as well. Also, in terms of Y chromosome distribution, you can see the R1A, R1B, and one is a West European marker, the other one is an East European marker. And the West European marker occurs in the western portions where the Russians were the colonizers. The West European one occurs through this area where when the US sold Alaska to the Russian, or the Russians sold Alaska to the US, the English and Scandinavian fishermen came to this region, and there was considerable gene flow going on. Okay. So as far as Mantell tests on Y haplogroup, Y haplotypes, genetic distance. So remember the correlation between mitochondrial DNA distances, genetic distances, and geography based on Mantell tests. It was 0.72, highly statistical. In the case of Y chromosomes, there is no statistically significant correlation. Okay, so the pattern does not reflect geography in any way. It had to do with just which fishermen, which colonizers were present in that particular region. So the Y chromosome distances are not significant, and Mantell tests intermatch mitochondrial DNA versus Y SDRs using May's DA distance measure, again, is not significant. So there's no relationship between geographic patterns and geography and genetics of Y chromosome mitochondrial DNA, as you'd expect, because there was a one-way gene flow, Russians, Scandinavians, into the Aleut gene pool. And one can also look at our matrix plot of Y chromosome haplogroups, and you see that the Russian Y chromosomes cluster with St. George, King Cove, St. Paul, etc. And so you see on the eastern, mainly Germany, England, Scandinavia are the closest to them genetically. And also you can look at surname analysis, and what you find is in the Western Islands, you see Russian surnames. On the Eastern Islands, you see Scandinavian English names, Johnson, Peterson, etc. are the most common surnames. And there's no correlation between Y chromosome and surname, because normally you'd expect to find the Y chromosome and the surname to be highly correlated. You don't find it here because the Aleuts were given specific surnames by their godfather, a Russian godfather, and they assumed the surname of the godfather, and so there's no relationship between descent, biological descent, and surname in this case. Bering Island and Kamchatka, the Bering Islands, Ostrov Beringa is here. Medne is no longer inhabited. This is Kamchatka, where we collected samples from Aleuts and from other native populations. And one of the things that you find that's most striking is out of the whole network median joining network analysis, the very small amount of variation that you see on Bering Island. Why the small variation? Well, the founding population was very small, and D was fixed, A was lost in this particular population. So you have an example of founder effect or genetic drift among the varying population. In terms of using autosomal markers, SDRs, to measure admixture, these are the ones that were used, and the admixture on Bering Island was about 60% Aleut, 40% Russian, even though there were hardly any Aleut Y chromosomes present. 60-40 was the admixture rate. Also, we got involved in a study on Sakwak man, or this is Inuk. This is a reconstruction of Inuk. The only thing we really have on Inuk is his hair. And his hair was stored in the museum in Copenhagen. And a big, big chunk of hair. Nobody thought anything about it. The Danes were looking for skeletal material to do ancient DNA. They couldn't find any that was available from Greenland. And so they tried extracting DNA from Inuk's hair. And the reconstruction is, several people told me that the reconstruction looks a lot like Eski Willerslev, those of you who may know him, fierce-looking person that he is. Both. And so Inuk, his original hair came from this site right here and had been stored, and we thought that hair, unless you had the follicles of hair, you wouldn't get any DNA. In reality, it's pretty well stored within the hair. Initially, the mitochondrial DNA results for Inuk were somewhat surprising in that Inuk had the same subtype of DNA, okay, as, so this is Sakwak, as a subtype of what you find in the Aleutian Islands. On Bering Island, the same subtype of D2A1A, and he had D2A1. So, surprisingly, the Aleutes and a 5,000-year-old Greenland Eskimo shared similar genetics. And Gilbert, in the article in Science, argued that the first migration then, which preceded the Thule migration, the Paleo-Eskimo, came from Siberia, and we're talking in terms of 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, that there was a migration into Greenland, and then the Thule migration. Genetically, the Thule and the Paleo-Thule and the Paleo-Eskimo are quite different. Okay, the Paleo-Eskimo, the Sakwak, representative of Paleo-Eskimo, is very, very much more Asian, clusters with the Asian populations, quite different from the others. So the Sakwak genome, and this was really the first Paleo Eskimo Native American that was done where the entire genome was actually sequenced. And this was published in Nature Genetics, if you're interested, this last year. It's the first complete sequence, or actually about 80% of the entire genome that was sequenced. And the interesting finding is Sakwak clusters with Siberia, not with Aleutes for the entire genome, not with Eskimos, but with Siberian populations first and foremost, Koryaks, Eaglemen, etc. Okay, this just shows the distribution and the variation observed. So these high confidence sequences then were Sakwak clusters with Siberian, Chukchi, and Koryaks instead of either Inuit or Native Americans, providing evidence of migration from Siberia about 5,500 years ago. And in the matrilineal, there's discontinuity between Sakwak and Neo-Eskimos. So, in terms of mitochondrial DNA sequences, they preserve the genetic structure of the Aleut populations. How do we know this? Because it reflects the migration because of the high correlation with geography, so that you find, although there was a reduction in variation in the Aleutes from the 5 founding haplogroups only to 2, A and D. Most gene flow came from Russian males to Aleut females, and this is reflected in the only 15% of the Y chromosome haplotypes, or haplogroups. Q or Q3, that's all there was as far as the Aleut. There's no C present, none observed. Remaining haplogroups are European, E, I1A, and Eurasian, as far as Y chromosome is concerned. So this pattern of gene flow then resulted from a policy advocated by the Russian governor Bering for politically controlling the native population. Okay. It was not a random thing. Send the males away, and there are economic benefits, but also you can control the population better this way. Okay, oops, wrong one. Post-contact, gene flow into the Aleutian Islands was Russian males in central and western regions. English and Scandinavian fishermen entered the eastern islands after the sale of Alaska by the Russians. Only 15%, Aleut males contributed only 15% of the Y chromosomes to the gene pool. Genetic discontinuity coincides with settlement of the Aleut Islands promoted by changes in the climate. And so most of the movements occurred in the coldest periods, so there's definite association between migration, movement into the islands, and the severity of the sea and the winds of the time. Kin-structured migration, we suspected that, but in this case of spatial autocorrelation, it shows very clearly that the fact that you have part of the correlation is positive, part of the spatial autocorrelation is negative, is the result of kin migration. Data suggestive of several migrations from Siberia. One 16 to 20,000 years ago gave rise to Native Americans. The second, at least there was 2 migrations, even though some of the work we did with using the ubiquitous SDRs suggested a single migration. This certainly suggested that there were at least minimally 2 migrations into the Americas. So Aleuts present in eastern islands 9,000 years ago, do they represent another migration? No, possibly, most likely they do. So maybe even 3 migrations. As far as integration of archaeology, genetics is concerned, ancient DNA studies versus contemporary populations, this was integrated in a special issue of this journal, Human Biology, October-December 2010, edited by myself and Dixie West, Dennis O'Rourke, and the title is The Aleuts, Origins, Culture, Genetics, and this is the specific issue of the journal. So if you want to go back and reread or find out about how the genetics, linguistics, cultural is all integrated, it's there. There's a very fine linguistics chapter in this on the linguistics of the Aleutian Islands. Acknowledgements. Aleutian Pribilof Island Association, who were kind enough to allow us to do the study. The Aleut Corporation and Tribal Councils. When I first went and gave my talk to the Aleut Corporation, they were a little skeptical, and then I mentioned also that my grandmother was part Buryat, and after my talk, a couple of them came up to me, gave me a big hug, and said, "Cousin, basically you're one of us." And so after that, it opened all the doors. We had no problems, and certainly for 10 years to be doing this, almost 10 years, on all the islands, and to get all the tribal councils in agreement is amazing these days, given the hostility, and in many cases, rightfully so, against anthropologists and geneticists. Also, I have to thank Alice Petrovelli, who is an Aleut elder who got her degree from Haskell back in the 40s. She was a fantastic person, and Liza Mack, who's a cultural anthropology graduate student, and my collaborators, Dennis O'Rourke, former student of mine, and Dixie West, who taken some courses from me, an archaeology student from here. Both of them got their PhDs from KU. and graduate assistants, Rubina Rubitz and Mark Zlayutro, who got their PhDs and now are in Texas. And I have to thank NSF for their sponsorship and funding. Without this, it'd be impossible to do this work. That's it. Thank you.